Welcome to Prism. I want you to pause for a moment and really pay attention because what you're about to hear might feel uncomfortably familiar. There are men watching this who already sense that something in their relationship isn't quite right. They can't fully explain it. They don't have clear evidence. And yet, deep inside, there's a quiet feeling they can't shake. The hardest part is not the confusion itself, but the self-doubt that comes with it. You start questioning your own mind, wondering if you're overthinking, if you're being insecure, or if you're imagining things that aren't really there. Stay with me because what we're going to explore isn't about fear or blame, it's about awareness. And awareness, when handled with calm and clarity, can protect you from emotional damage that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. Picture a simple moment. You're sitting beside her, maybe in a car or on the couch. She's on her phone, texting. Her expression looks normal. Nothing seems obviously wrong, but something inside you feels off. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle, almost silent signal that something has shifted. Many men ignore this feeling because they've been taught that trusting their intuition makes them look weak or controlling. But the truth is, that quiet signal is often your mind trying to process patterns before your conscious thoughts catch up. Over time, psychologists have observed something important about relationships. They rarely break suddenly. Most of the time, the disconnection begins long before any official ending. It starts with small emotional shifts, tiny changes in tone, in attention, in communication. Words begin to change before actions become obvious. And if you don't know how to recognize those early changes, you may only realize what happened when the distance has already grown too wide. When emotional focus begins to move away from a relationship, it doesn't happen with a clear announcement. There's no obvious turning point. Instead, it's gradual, quiet, almost invisible at first. A person's emotional energy starts redirecting, and their language begins to reflect that shift in subtle ways. This isn't about accusing anyone or assuming the worst. It's about understanding human behavior so you can stay grounded and aware. One of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting for undeniable proof. They expect something dramatic like a confession or a clear betrayal. But human behavior doesn't always work like that. People reveal their inner state through patterns, repeated phrases, consistent changes in tone, and small but noticeable differences in how they show up emotionally. If you only look for big moments, you'll miss the quiet signals that appear much earlier. Let's start with one of the most common and misunderstood signals. A single word that seems completely harmless on the surface: busy. Everyone gets busy. Life can be demanding. Work, responsibilities, stress, these are all real. So hearing, "I've been really busy lately," doesn't automatically mean anything is wrong. The key is not the word itself, but the pattern behind it. When someone is emotionally connected to you, they don't suddenly become unavailable. Instead, they find ways to stay connected, even during busy times. A quick message, a short call, a small effort to maintain that emotional link. But when emotional focus begins to shift, availability changes in a subtle way. Responses become slower, conversations feel shorter, plans become harder to organize. The energy behind interactions feels different. The word busy becomes a convenient explanation that doesn't raise suspicion because it sounds reasonable and socially acceptable. At first, you may not question it. In fact, you might do the opposite. You give more space. You try to be understanding. You don't want to come across as demanding or needy. And that's exactly why this shift can go unnoticed for so long. The change isn't in what's being said, it's in what's no longer happening. Think back to the early stage of any strong connection. When someone truly wants to stay close to you, they make time, even in small ways. Emotional connection naturally creates effort. But when that emotional energy begins to move elsewhere, time starts to feel limited. Even small moments of connection begin to disappear. What's important to understand is that this shift often doesn't feel dramatic from the inside. The person experiencing it may genuinely believe they are just overwhelmed or stressed. The mind is very good at creating logical explanations that reduce discomfort. But what often goes unnoticed is where that emotional energy is being redirected. Humans rarely pull away from connection without moving towards something else. That something isn't always another person. It could be a new interest, a different emotional focus, or even an internal shift. But the result feels the same. The connection that once felt natural begins to feel distant. And this is where confusion begins to grow. You start asking yourself questions. Maybe you're expecting too much. Maybe you should be more patient. Maybe this is just a phase. So you adjust, you lower your expectations, you silence your concerns. But instead of things improving, the distance quietly increases. The uncomfortable truth is that emotional withdrawal often shows up as selective availability, not complete absence, but a noticeable change in consistency and effort. And because it happens gradually, it's easy to dismiss until it becomes a pattern you can no longer ignore. What matters most here is not reacting with fear, but recognizing the shift with clarity. Because once you see the pattern, you can decide how to respond in a way that protects your emotional well being, rather than losing yourself trying to hold on to something that is quietly changing. This is just the beginning of understanding these subtle shifts. And as we continue, you'll start to see how other simple words and behaviors can reveal even deeper changes beneath the surface. Now we move to another word that seems completely harmless on the surface, yet carries much deeper meaning when patterns begin to change. That word is friend. At first, it feels safe, reassuring even. You hear, he's just a friend, or we're just friends, and naturally you want to trust that. You don't want to be the jealous or insecure partner. You want to be calm, understanding, and respectful. That's what a good partner does. But here's something most people are never taught. Emotional connections don't usually begin with attraction. They begin with comfort, with conversation, with shared understanding. What eventually becomes something deeper often starts as something that feels completely innocent. Two people talk. They share thoughts, frustrations, jokes. They begin to understand each other. And over time, that emotional familiarity builds a kind of bond that the brain naturally responds to. Before anything physical ever happens, emotional closeness lays the foundation. This is why the word friend can sometimes be misleading, not because it's always dishonest, but because it can be incomplete. In the beginning, it may truly be just a friendship. There's no plan, no intention for it to become anything more. But emotional bonds don't ask for permission before they grow. As conversations become more frequent, something subtle begins to shift. There are inside jokes now, personal stories, small details being shared regularly. And with each interaction, a new layer of emotional connection is formed. Slowly, almost invisibly, this new connection begins to take up space. And here's where the shift becomes important. Emotional energy is not unlimited. When more of it is given in one place, less of it naturally remains somewhere else. It's not always intentional, but it is real. From your perspective, the change doesn't come with an announcement. Instead, you begin to notice patterns. His name comes up more often. Stories start including him more frequently. There's a subtle increase in how present he is in her daily life, even if nothing inappropriate is openly happening. At the same time, something else changes. Your connection feels slightly different. Not broken, not gone, but altered. There's a quiet distance that's hard to explain. What makes this especially confusing is that everything still sounds reasonable. If you bring it up, you may feel like you're overreacting. After all, it's just a friend. But your intuition doesn't respond to labels. It responds to patterns, tone, and emotional shifts. One of the clearest signals is not the friendship itself, but how it's handled. Healthy friendships are open. They don't require defensiveness. They don't create tension when discussed. There's transparency, comfort, and ease. But when emotional lines begin to blur, even slightly, the reactions can change. You might ask a simple question and receive an unexpectedly sharp response. You might express a small concern and feel dismissed or misunderstood. Suddenly, something that should feel open begins to feel guarded. That's the moment many men struggle with. Because now it's not just about another person being present. It's about feeling like you've been moved slightly outside of a space where you used to belong. This doesn't mean something physical has happened. In many cases, it hasn't. But emotional replacement doesn't begin with actions. It begins with attention, with where someone chooses to invest their thoughts, their time, and their emotional energy. And emotional shifts like this often happen quietly enough that even the person experiencing them may not fully recognize what's changing. It feels normal from the inside, just conversations, just connection, nothing serious. But from the outside, the difference is noticeable. You begin to feel something that's hard to put into words, not exactly jealousy, not exactly fear, more like a sense that your role is slowly becoming less central. And that feeling matters, not because it proves anything on its own, but because it's a signal that something in the emotional dynamic has changed. Now let's move to the next word, one that sounds mature, reasonable, and even healthy when used in the right context. That word is space. I just need some space. I need time to think. I want to focus on myself for a while. These phrases sound emotionally intelligent, and sometimes they truly are. In a healthy relationship, space can be a positive thing. It allows people to recharge, reflect, and maintain individuality. But again, the meaning is not in the word alone. It's in the timing, the tone, and what surrounds it. When a relationship is emotionally strong, space feels safe. It comes with reassurance. There's clarity. You still feel connected, even while taking time apart. The bond remains intact, but when emotional closeness has already started to weaken, space feels different. It feels uncertain, undefined, colder. Instead of reassurance, there's silence. Instead of clarity, there's ambiguity. You're left wondering what this space actually means. Is it temporary? Is it distance? Is it the beginning of something ending? This uncertainty is what creates emotional tension, because now you don't know how to respond. If you move closer, you risk pushing her away. If you step back, you fear losing the connection entirely. So many men freeze in this moment, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and don't want to make the wrong move. From a psychological perspective, this stage often reflects internal conflict. When someone begins feeling drawn towards something new while still being in an existing relationship, it creates tension inside them, a kind of emotional pressure. And the mind looks for ways to reduce that pressure without immediately confronting it. Creating distance becomes one of the easiest ways to do that. Space becomes a buffer, a way to step back emotionally without fully explaining why. It allows room to process new feelings without facing the discomfort of clarity. Again, this is rarely done with bad intentions. It often feels justified from the inside, like self-care, like needing clarity. But from your side, it feels like being slowly placed on hold. Conversations lose depth. Plans become less certain. The emotional warmth that once felt natural now feels inconsistent. And this is where many men try to fix things by increasing effort. More messages, more attention, more attempts to reconnect. But the difficult truth is that emotional closeness cannot be forced through effort alone. When someone is pulling away internally, chasing them often creates more distance, not less. Because closeness isn't built by pressure, it's built by mutual willingness. So the situation becomes a quiet, emotional limbo. You're still connected, but something feels paused, unclear, unstable. And that uncertainty can be one of the most emotionally draining experiences because there's no clear problem to solve, yet something clearly doesn't feel right. Understanding this stage is important, not so you can react with fear, but so you can stay grounded, so you don't lose yourself trying to fix something that requires two people choosing the same connection. We're about to move into the final phase of this shift, where the emotional distance becomes even more noticeable and harder to ignore. Now we come to a word that sounds completely valid, completely real, and almost impossible to question. That word is stress. I've just been really stressed. I have a lot on my mind. I'm overwhelmed right now. And let's be clear, stress is real. Life can be demanding, unpredictable, and exhausting. Everyone experiences pressure at different points. So when you hear this, your natural response is to be supportive. You want to help. You want to be there. You want to make things easier for her. But here's where the shift becomes quietly painful. There was a time when, during stress, she moved closer to you. She shared her thoughts with you. She looked for comfort in your presence. You were the place she went to feel understood and supported. Now something feels different. Instead of moving toward you, she seems to move away from you. This is one of the most confusing emotional changes a person can experience. Because you're doing what you believe is right. You're being patient. You're being understanding. You're giving support without pressure. And yet, no matter how much effort you put in, the emotional distance doesn't shrink. It stays the same, or sometimes it even grows. What's happening here is subtle but important. When emotional connection begins to form elsewhere, the brain starts associating relief, comfort, and emotional release with that new connection instead of the existing one. This isn't always intentional. It's not always a conscious decision, but emotional habits begin to shift. She may start sharing her thoughts with someone else first, laughing with someone else first, turning to someone else when something good or bad happens. And without any clear moment of change, your role slowly shifts. You go from being the emotional safe place to feeling like an obligation. And obligations feel heavy when emotional excitement exists somewhere else. So stress becomes the explanation. Not necessarily as a lie, but as a protective layer. It allows distance without confrontation. It reduces internal guilt. It avoids difficult conversations. And the hardest part is this: stress cannot be argued with. You can't challenge it without feeling insensitive. You can't question it without risking conflict. So the distance continues quietly without resistance. This is where many men begin to overextend themselves, trying to become even more supportive, more patient, more understanding, hoping that if they just do enough, things will return to how they were. But emotional distance, created by shifting emotional focus, cannot be repaired by effort alone. Effort doesn't create emotional desire. Effort doesn't rebuild excitement. Effort doesn't restore a connection that is no longer being chosen. And when this continues, the relationship starts to feel one-sided in a way that's difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. Which brings us to the final word, the one that often appears when the emotional separation is nearly complete, even if the relationship hasn't officially ended. That word is change. I've changed. Things feel different now. I'm not the same person anymore. These words may sound calm, even honest, but they carry deep meaning because when someone says they've changed, they're not just talking about habits or routines, they're talking about identity. At the beginning of a relationship, two people create a shared emotional space, shared moments, shared laughter, shared ways of seeing the world. And over time, that connection becomes part of who you are. You don't just connect with the other person. You connect with the version of yourself that exists when you're with them. So when change enters the conversation, what's really happening is this: the emotional version of that connection is fading, and that realization can be deeply painful because you can feel it before you fully understand it. The conversations don't feel the same. The energy isn't the same. The emotional warmth isn't the same. And there's no single moment you can point to and say, this is when everything broke. That's what makes it so difficult. It wasn't one event, it was a gradual drift. And this is where many men begin to blame themselves. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Could I have stopped this? Take a breath and listen carefully. Emotional distance is rarely caused by one mistake. It usually happens through gradual shifts in attention, energy, and emotional focus. Relationships don't survive on history. They survive on continuous emotional choice. And when that choice stops being mutual, the connection begins to weaken, slowly, quietly, but consistently. Here's the truth that many people were never taught. Your value is not defined by how hard you try to keep someone who is emotionally stepping away. Your value is defined by your ability to recognize when emotional reciprocity is no longer present, and having the strength to respect yourself enough to not chase what is no longer choosing you. You deserve mutual effort, mutual presence, mutual emotional investment, not confusion, not constant doubt, not the feeling that you're slowly disappearing while trying to hold everything together. If any part of this felt familiar, don't react with panic or anger. Respond with awareness. Have honest conversations. Ask clear questions. Pay attention not just to words, but to consistent actions. Stay calm, stay grounded, and most importantly, do not abandon your self-respect in the process of trying to save something. Because the strongest relationships are not built on guessing or uncertainty. They are built on clarity, honesty, and two people who continue choosing each other, openly and consistently. And remember this: no matter what you're going through, the right relationship will never make you feel like you are slowly fading out of your own life.